This segment of the Alice Stewart Show is brought to you by Aero Plumbing. For all your household or business plumbing needs, call Aero Plumbing at 1-866-PLUMBER or schedule an appointment online at aeroplumbing.net.
Welcome back to the Alice Stewart Show, 7:35, 25 minutes before 8 o'clock. Happy Veterans Day to all of those who have served our country at peace and at war. And if you see a member of our military, make sure that you show your gratitude and appreciation to them. I want to talk about Obamacare and the fate of the Affordable Care Act in light of recent action by the Supreme Court. You may recall on Friday, the Supreme Court agreed to hear a new challenge to the Affordable Care Act. And what this does, it brings the law back before the High Court just after it has been challenged many times in the court system. And at issue is the case of questioning the legality of subsidies offered to help millions of low and middle income Americans buy health insurance. And here to break this all down, we're joined with attorney Dan Greenberg. He is head of the Advance Arkansas Institute. Dan, great to have you here.
Good morning, Alice. Thanks for having me on today.
I'm glad you could join us and explain what this means. There's been so much back and forth with the Affordable Care Act, and we know that we're not going to hear the new rates for some time, and a lot of that was pushed back until after the election. But in terms of this, what the Supreme Court, this new challenge going before the Supreme Court, what's that about?
Well, Alice, you probably remember that under Obamacare, every state has to decide whether to set up an exchange or whether to have the federal government do it.
Right.
And according to the strict letter of the law, those two types of exchanges, state exchanges and federal exchanges, get treated very differently. Essentially, subsidies flow through one kind of exchange, but they don't flow through the other kind of exchange. Well, the Obama administration doesn't see it that way. The Obama administration says that all the exchanges have to work the same, even though that's not literally what the law says. And so the Obama administration told the IRS to write regulations that spend about $60 billion this year and subject about 60 million Americans to mandates that the letter of the law doesn't allow. And what this means is that there's a real distinction between what the law says and what the Obama administration says the law says. And so you have a fight between the bureaucrats and the Obama administration on one side and what the law actually says on the other side. And this has been a subject of controversy in a lot of lower courts. And in the last couple of months, there have been a number of different decisions. In every decision, the judges have admitted that there's a lot of merit to the idea that you actually have to follow the law. You actually have to do what the law says, not just what the bureaucrats wanted to say. But commentators have said that people who are suing, and the people who are trying to make the Obama administration obey the law the way it is written, commentators have said that this is just a crazy interpretation, that it's meritless. The judges don't say that.
Right, and the bottom line here is this needs to be ironed out because you have the intent of the law, or the main focus of the law is to help millions of low-income, middle-income people buy health insurance. Critics of that say that the subsidies that are being provided for them are illegal, and opponents of the subsidies have argued that the Supreme Court should take care of this issue now, resolve it, because we're talking billions and billions of dollars in public money, and when there being such a dispute and controversy over the legalities of it, let's figure this out now as opposed to after the fact.
Exactly. The Supreme Court has decided, as I read it, under one of its rules, the Supreme Court says that it can take on a case in a lower court when there's an important question of federal law that has not been settled but should be settled by the Supreme Court. I think this case is probably more important, than the previous constitutional law case that was decided about a couple of years ago, because based on past decisions, I think it's very, very likely that the Supreme Court is going to say we have to stick to the letter of the law here. And, of course, it's very tempting for anybody who has a 400-page law to say, well, we don't really need to look at what the law says. What we want to do is we want to look at what we'd like the law to say. We'd like the consequences of the law to be. But that's not really the way these things work. You actually have to look at what the law says. This is especially the case when you have a law that's produced as a product of political compromise that people agree was rushed, that people agree it doesn't give everything to everybody that we thought it would. It's especially the case that when there's controversy as to how a law operates, you have to first go to what the law says. You're not really allowed to go to some committee chairman or some expert and say, well, this is what were you thinking? What were you thinking when the law was passed? It doesn't matter what people were thinking. It doesn't matter what people want. What matters is what the law says. And what the law says is that it's going to treat different exchanges very differently, and there's a large political significance to this, which is that I think that this could be the kind of opening in the dam that forces Congress and President Obama to go back and make needed reforms to this law. And, the posture, I think, of President Obama has been more or less that I'm not going to let Congress tinker with this as long as I'm around. Well, if it turns out that what Congress produced was essentially unworkable, I think that opens the door to reforms, and that creates a new political chapter in Obamacare.
Well, Dan, folks are aware you're an attorney. You're also a former state legislator. You understand the political and legal implications of this. Now, with in Washington having the House more Republicans in control there, the Republicans in control in the Senate, and Obamacare is certainly up for debate. How do you see this moving forward? We have Senator-elect Tom Cotton, who has made it quite clear we need to go in and do away with Obamacare, or certainly revamp it from all sides. How do you see Obamacare from a political standpoint moving forward?
Well, I certainly hope that it leads to Congress and the President facing the reality that this law is in so many ways unworkable and needs to be fixed. And, we've talked a little bit about the subsidies that go through the exchanges, but there's also something else that I think that this new Supreme Court acceptance opens the door to. The subsidies are funded by the employer mandates and the employee mandates.
Right.
Those are what funds the subsidies. And that mandate, those two mandates, they're a kind of tax. And so when we have this reform of the exchanges and we get rid of the subsidies, what that amounts to is a gigantic tax cut. We have it in our power, I think, to have a kind of gigantic tax cut if we actually have these exchanges function the way that the law was written. We have a possibility of different states competing and offering different kind of tax burdens and tax opportunities. That way, we can actually have competition among the states, and we can have a different kind of possibility that's open to people depending on what state they live in. So I think this forces, if the plaintiff's case is upheld and we decide that state and federal exchanges are going to be treated differently in the law, this really does open the door to a wholesale revamping of Obamacare so that it works. And I hope that we get to the point where we actually have transparent subsidies, because the whole point of Obamacare is to hide taxes and to hide subsidies. And you probably saw that fairly famous quote from one of the architects of Obamacare that came to prominence just a few days ago. You probably remember Jonathan Gruber, the MIT economist who helped write Obamacare. He said, lack of transparency when we passed Obamacare was a huge political advantage, and basically call it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever, but basically that stupidity was really, really critical for Obamacare to pass. Now that we have more information about how this stuff actually works, I think it's going to open the door to fixing Obamacare so that we have a helpful healthcare system that's popularly supported.
Absolutely, and I think the point that you just made, the MIT economist Jonathan Gruber, who was an architect of Obamacare, and as you say, what he said, the stupidity of the American voter led us to hide Obamacare's true costs from the public. And
that's right.
This is a guy that created Obamacare, and you talk about the transparency. That's exactly what they did not want in order for this to be passed. We're going to take a break. I want to come back and talk with you. I want to ask you, Dan, about what this means for the private option here in Arkansas. Of course, a lot of folks keeping an eye on the Affordable Care Act in Washington. What does this mean for private option in Arkansas? Well, and also an event that's coming up for Advance Arkansas Institute. So we'll be back with Dan Greenberg right after this here on the Alice Stewart Show. This segment of the program brought to you by Aero Plumbing. For all of your household or business plumbing needs, give them a call, 501-588-3200, or check them out online at aeroplumbing.net.